Jujutsu Kaisen. Oh boy, where do we begin with this one? Despite the amount of coverage Jujutsu Kaisen is getting due to recent developments in the manga and the long-awaited adaptation of the Shibuya incident arc, no one's really talking about the art. Like, am I the only one that sees this riz? There are various topics to discuss for this one, and not all of them turned out the way you would expect. Some things improved in ways that would be expected, but things like line work changed very differently. We will also discuss the turning point of the art, what caused such drastic change, and what effects it will have not only on Gege Akutami, but also the future of JJK. So without any further ado, let's get right into the artistic evolution of Jujutsu Kaisen. Line work. In most of my coverages, we point out how the line work progressively became more smooth and clear, things that are associated to skill and experience. But this is far from the case here. Jujutsu Kaisen started off with very clear line work. There are smooth diversity between pen strokes, outlines are a lot thicker, whilst the internal detail itself is minimalistic. It didn't try to cram in a lot of lines, and in that aspect it resembles Bleach. Now, as for modern Jujutsu Kaisen, well, you know how those black string ball things are drawn by artists to convey grumpiness? Yeah, that's basically JJK's line work. The line work became a lot more chaotic. The previously present long, smooth strings of line work are now made up of multiple smaller strokes. There is also a lot of rapid distortions between the connecting points of individual lines. They don't smoothly transition into each other and sometimes even bleed into each other, creating these large blobs in between line works. Now I know what you're thinking, boo-hoo, he's a hater, how could you make fun of Gege Akutami, blah blah. Listen bruh, stop using your second amendment on me. When I describe how the art changed, it is just that. It is just me describing, there is nothing more to it. I'm not trying to bash Gege Akutami because later in the video we will discuss why Gege Akutami decided to change his art so much. So, just bear with me because we will get to everything. But before that, we got my favorite thing, shading. Shading is something I really like, but sadly in JJK, these people look like the darkest shade of Norwegians. Shading in early Jujutsu Kaisen was rather devoid. There was on occasion some cross-hatching under the chin, but aside from that, JJK kept up with a clean aesthetic. This is another similarity with Bleach, and just like that series, JJK only utilizes inky blacks and grey tones for the uniforms and hair, and it's very reminiscent of the Shinigami Shock shows. Only shading Gege would use is grey tones, but even that was pretty minimalistic. I give this a 8 out of 10 on the nighttime reading safety scale. I can testify that this will not get you blind. In modern JJK, the shading is dialed up to 11, especially with the cross-hatching. Okay, that's kind of a lie. Gege doesn't use that much shading compared to other mangas at least, but it's still very prominent. The main difference here is that Gege draws cross-hatching very loosely. Unlike other mangakas who try to draw lines as straight as a Texas resident, Gege doesn't focus too much on the smaller details and making them perfect. Rather, he focuses on the bigger picture. If you already knew and expected all these changes, well, trust me, this next change you will never see coming. But before we get into that, I nearly forgot to add this segment in here. Like, please subscribe. I never ask this, but please subscribe. A lot of people just don't do it because they forget. So, okay, I literally can't say that with a straight face. On to the character designs. This is something I find extremely fascinating because this is probably one of the more unique changes to JJK's style. People criticize JoJo's Bizarre Adventures art, especially later down the line, for having the same face syndrome. This is especially common for artists who finally get the grips of their style, know exactly what they want to draw, and subconsciously end up triggering the Shadow Clone Jutsu. Previously in JJK, all the characters' faces were a lot slimmer. They were created with diversified shapes, wrote that before their eyes, noses, jawlines. Everything was completely different. To be fair though, this art, for all of its diversity, was rather generic. Everyone had your average triangle jawline and had that Korean singer energy to them. But this soon changed in the midpoint of Jujutsu Kaisen. Faces now look very similar. All of the men especially have that sledgehammer jawline. Mouths are wide and eyes are virtually the same shape and size. If you look at them side by side, obviously there are differences, but also there are obvious similarities. If the other art looked like Korean boy bands, this is like an item that will be used in Rainbow Six Siege. Shading also became quite prominent in these characters now. Just like Bleach, the author uses cross-hatching under the eyebrows to convey more of a 3D shape to them. When it comes to the actual character designs, they didn't really change much and followed the same structure as before, that being simple and unique designs with minimalistic line work and shading. Whilst the designs didn't really change, the style simply filtered them out in a completely new light. The backgrounds in Jujutsu Kaisen were always top-notch, especially when they became the main focus. They were full of diversity and foliage, used a lot of dark shading gray tones, and just gave everything a lot more life. The smaller panels too had quite a bit of detail, but in most cases they were very minimalistic. But they did serve their purpose well, so I guess it doesn't matter. In modern JJK, the backgrounds turn to this sprawling metropolis glittering with soaring skyscrapers, conveyed with the single worst perspective ever. It makes me sick thinking about how long and how much planning this took to draw. Every single technique you can imagine, every single skill, any type of trickery, mastery, it's used here. And it is just brilliant. Now let's just reduce the hype because the smaller panels are also really goated. They have a lot more detail than previously, along with a lot more shading. Despite their size, they are indeed drawn with more detail, but not too much to the point where they don't overwhelm the foreground characters. So, we discussed most of the differences between two halves of JJK, but you still might be asking yourself, why did this change even occur? When did it happen? When will we get a threesome between Yuji, Gojo, and Megumi? Oh, that's just me. Okay, whatever. For a manga that doesn't even have 240 chapters, this change is very, very extreme. So what happened? Most people would instantly point to the long hiatus Gege took, which was preceded by the submission of literal storyboards. Gege Akutami was very sick and mentally exhausted. The trenches of Shonen Jump did a number on him, so you would expect this to be the turning point. But you would be wrong, this is not when it happened. There is a case to be made that this indeed sped up the change, but all the evolutions we talked about were already prominent by chapter 30. To give you an example, look at Yuji in chapter 1, now look at Yuji within the next 40 chapters, and now look at him nearly 100 chapters later. I think it's fair to say that Gege Akutami found out the hard way just how fucked up Shonen Jump is. The finer line work, dark shading, and attention to detail take way more time compared to a more chaotic style. A more refined art style will be less forgiving when it comes to mistakes. If you fuck up a single line here, it will shine brighter than Gojo's eyes, but in an art style like this, you can make a few mistakes, but you can easily overshadow it because the art style allows you to do so. It's far more forgiving. With all of this considered, I think it's clear to say that Gege trying to deliver a great story in art was lowering some weight on his shoulders, and that's totally fine. But what this entails for the future of the series is uncertain. But as long as Akutami is in good health and we're getting chapters relatively consistently, we have no room to complain. This art is still fucking amazing. Only thing we can do is to get ready for the upcoming pain of the Shibuya incident arc. Trust me when I say this, you will never think about the art after watching this.